This morning, we honor our 6 Hall of Fame inductees. As we get started, I want to recognize our board members, our trustees, and our Hall of Fame committee. Press Association officers and directors, Hannah Heichman, Terry Hell, Scott Refsland, David Hedges, Perry Nardo, Sally C., Jim McGoldrick, Jim Spanner, and Doug Scaff. Our foundation trustees, Ed Given, Frank Wood, Pam Pritt, Nanya Friend, and Randy Mooney. Our Hall of Fame committee, Dean Diana Martinelli, Frank Wood, Phoebe Heichman, Don Smith, and the late Ogden Nutting. And now members of our staff, Brenda Pinnell, our graphic designer, Stella Gill, our office manager, Ben Robinson with video production, and Jack Cipoletti with sponsorships and corporate partnerships. This event would not be the same or be possible without the support of our corporate partners and sponsors. Our corporate partners include AARP of West Virginia, WVU University Relations, and the Press Association Foundation. We also want to thank our hospitality suite sponsor, the Wheeling CVB, and our other Hall of Fame celebration sponsors include the Health Plan, represented by Megan Roskovinsky, Director of Government Affairs, David Flatley, Director of Marketing, and Jeff Knight, President and CEO. We also have the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine, represented by President Dr. Jim Nimitz. And this morning, our brunch sponsor is Laudamus Communications. And I'd like to welcome Paul Laudamus up to speak.
I'd like to recognize my guests that are here with me today. My son, Carson Laudamus, means the world to me. Sam Cipoletti, a.k.a. Sammy the Pitbull. So he's brothers with Jack, so there's the connection there. And then Doug Costain, he's the new Brook baseball coach. Appreciate you guys being here today. Doug, we expect championships, just so you know. Great things are going to happen with Brook baseball this year, and so we'd like to invite the press and the media out to cover them as much as you can. But thank you all for being here today. Distinguished members of the West Virginia Press Association, the West Virginia School of Journalism, the Hall of Fame inductees, the journalists, and everyone's special guest and family. Today we celebrate the exceptional achievements of the individuals who left an incredible mark on the field of journalism in West Virginia. The Hall of Fame brunch is not a celebration of their remarkable careers, but it's a testament of the power and importance of the free press in West Virginia. I'm proud to be the sponsor of today's Press Association luncheon. Growing up in Philippi, West Virginia, I had nothing. I was very fortunate. My family, my parents were divorced, and I got free cheese and the best damn peanut butter that the government could give me. So the government kind of helped me out a little bit. But what happened is I learned from an early age that the newspaper was very important, because I would read the Barber Democrat, the Intermountain, the Clarksburg Exponent, and on every Saturday I would buy the Dominion Post, because I wanted to read the sports section. That was very, very important to me. When I was growing up, my mother would always tell me to turn the idiot box off. For those of you who don't know what the idiot box was, it was the TV. So I had to turn the TV off. I didn't have TV in my house. So day in, day out, I would always watch my mother read the newspaper. She never missed a day, and I miss seeing that because I always loved her reading the paper. So today, that's why I read the paper. I read the paper from cover to cover. I read the Weirton Daily Times, the Intelligencer. I read the Wall Street Journal. And oftentimes I see stuff that happens 2 weeks before I see it online. Cleveland Cliffs is a perfect example of that. They always talk about an S-Mark acquiring U.S. Steel. Well, I read about it before I even heard about it on TV or online. So I also use the paper every day in my business. So in my business, I use public notices for bid opportunities around the state. I purchase a service from all around the country that provides aggregate data on RFPs that are being published. So if it wasn't for the paper, my call center would not be able to be in 38 states today. Very fortunate to have that. The second thing I do is really ironic is that we are also in the alarm monitoring business. So it's very litigious in that industry where lawsuits happen. Unfortunately, we've never had one, but we have to prove when there's a death. because someone calls to cancel the alarm system. So how do we prove the death? We have to have the obituary. So again, a very important part of my life is the newspaper, because that's how we have to cancel contracts. So the newspaper for me isn't dead, it's alive and thriving. And every day I correlate what I do in my business to being with you, and I'm always underneath the threat of a cell phone, because it's taking away two-way radios, it takes away pagers, it takes away inbound call centers. So I have to innovate, and I have to innovate daily by trying to find new products and services that I can offer my customers. So what I look for is products that are hot and sexy. Hot and sexy is what's hot, what's people want to buy today. So I try to innovate by finding those opportunities. But I grew up in this business, and the newspaper was very, very important to me, and I can't tell you how much it was. And so in today's fast-paced environment, the world's evolving, journalism's changing, and you have to protect the truth, you have to protect and inform, enlighten, and report the news as you see it, but also report the truth. You have the power to uncover stories that need to be told and listen to the voices that deserve to be heard and hold those people accountable, especially in government. Today, we honor those who pursued the truth, who have dedicated their lives to journalism, and who have made magnificent contributions to the state of West Virginia, but to also our industry. Journalism has to commit to the truth, as I talked about, the accuracy and fairness, but we must continue to adapt in the challenging media landscape. The landscape changes all the time, and if we're not on top of it, we have to embrace new technologies and platforms and uphold the highest standards. And most importantly, we must never forget the responsibility that we carry, not only to the journalism industry, but to our state and to our communities. I had the opportunity to meet the gentleman from St. Mary's, I think his name was Jim, and had a great conversation to him, and the passion that he carries, and he doesn't want to see the newspapers close in these communities. So he tries to keep them open, and I applaud that. I also challenge the state, challenge the Chamber of Commerce to try to have business retention and city officials and government officials to try to promote business, to keep businesses open. And Jim's doing that, and that's enlightening to me, because I try to do that for the two-way radio industry and the paging industry. But we're here today to celebrate the inductees and congratulate those who well deserve these honors. And it's really an amazing achievement to be here for that. I want to thank you for this opportunity, champion journalism, and for the betterment of West Virginia and our citizens. And thank you for what you do. It impacts my business. I'm a definitely avid reader, and I read books all the time. I read papers all the time. And I want to invite each and every one of you to come to Weirton, Brooke County. It's where our corporate headquarters is at. I'd love to show you our innovation center and kind of how we try to stay on top of cutting edge and on top of technology that's changing today. But it's amazing. It's amazing to see W.Va here. I found 3 new friends last night. They're over there waving at me. But thank them. That's amazing to see that their sponsorship's here too. So thank you and God bless. My name is Paul Laudamus, and I'm with Laudamus Communications and Security. We're located here in Weirton, West Virginia, in beautiful Hancock County. We are a diversified communications security holding company. I'm a second-generation business owner. I was proud to work for my father, but we've been able to take the company and grow it about 4 to 5 times. And we build 911 centers for 911 government agencies, police, fire, EMS. We also work with oil field companies that have digital communications that build the SCADA networks to control the oil fields. We're also in major healthcare facilities throughout West Virginia. We provide mission-critical communications for them, air medical helicopters. We build mission control rooms for steel industries. We do autonomous cranes, as well as to improve safety throughout these industrial organizations, as well as the oil and gas fields. We also have an inbound call center. We answer for clients all over the country. If you think it, dream it, we can do it. Being located in West Virginia, being in the northern panhandle, we have a triple level redundancy of energy supply. We have a quadruple level of telecommunications. Basically, my call center is disaster proof. One of the first things is what the state did, they recognized our potential. They saw our skilled workforce, and they wanted to invest in West Virginia. They provided us with economic development funds to be able to loan at very low interest rates, to be able to develop my new innovation center, as well as be able to provide employee training. They really wanted us to grow. They wanted to take care of our business and be able to us to grow and bring new jobs to West Virginia. Partnering with West Virginia companies is amazing for me, and I feel it's my responsibility to be able to grow our region, grow our economy, as well as grow our state. Where I'm at from Weirton, we're between Ohio and Pennsylvania. And because we're between Ohio and Pennsylvania, we're located close to an international airport, We have a major river, a major city. We have all the sports teams, all the plays, all the theaters that you want to go to, but we have the low cost of doing business, we have a low cost of living, and we have an outstanding education system. A lot of miscommunications and security said yes to West Virginia because of the people. I have a responsibility to create jobs, I have a responsibility to give back to our community, and I have a responsibility is to make West Virginia great. And so I want to be able to provide those opportunities for my people as well as other people in the region to come to West Virginia. Unlimited possibilities. Say yes to West Virginia.
Everyone just panicked. He's going to talk so long he needs water. But I do have some things to say, and I'm honored to be here. I'm Don Smith. I'm a member of the Hall of Fame Committee, and on behalf of the committee, we welcome all of you and thank you for being here. We're going to explain a little bit. This is our first Hall of Fame event since 2019, when COVID changed the world and impacted all of us. We have this event every other year, and out of precaution, we did not have it in 2021. So we are back now, and in that period, the committee and the board of directors and the staff, we reviewed the Hall of Fame and decided to make some changes. And I think it's important that you understand those. Perhaps the biggest change is we created our veterans class. We have a group of nominees, and we were only doing 2 nominees a year, every other year, I'm sorry, 2 nominees every other, 2 inductees every other year. We realized that the most recent would be the ones that would receive the votes, and that some of our deserving members who were on the list of nominees would never get in. So the committee and the board voted to add a veterans class, and anyone who left the industry before 2000 is in the veterans class. The current class will represent the most recent 25 years. So as this moves forward, the current class will always be 25 years, but the veterans class may represent people from 2002, 2004, it'll just keep changing. That allowed us to give recognition and proper honor to some of the veterans of our industry who would not have gotten in. So we're excited about that. We also changed the rule that it had been that nominees had to be deceased. We changed that to they just have to be out of the industry, be retired or out, so that we can recognize people while they're here to enjoy it, and importantly, that their families can be here with them to see that, and we think that's very important. I want to note our committee, and obviously I'm on the committee, and Dean Diana Martinelli from W.Va is on the committee. Our other committee members, as Betsy mentioned, are Frank Wood, Phoebe Heisman, and the late Ogden Nutting. And this is Bill Nutting is here with us. Bill, thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the committee, the association, and everyone, we extend our condolences, and we thank you for being here. The association will do something in addition to this. Bob Nutting and some of the family members couldn't be here. We will do something later when the entire family can be here. But it was important for the committee to recognize Ogden because he was on the committee, and helped organize and discuss and plan this event. And I will tell you that Ogden was a traditionalist and not necessarily in favor of all the changes that we were looking at, but he was also a member of the committee and a member of this industry in this state, and he went with the decision whether he personally would have agreed with it or not. I like to think after last night's reception and this event today that he would have been very happy with it. And I think, and Diane and I both talked, we think he would have agreed that this is a fitting way to recognize our people. I have the honor to read several of the veteran bios, and I'm going to do that, but we wanted to take a moment and recognize Ogden and his contributions. And I had the honor to know Ogden and work for him. So I'm going to do this. On the 25th of August, which just seems like yesterday, we lost a great newspaper man and a champion for the Press Association. Ogden was 87 at the time. He was a West Virginia Press supporter, a past president, an active member of the Hall of Fame committee, a lifetime member, Adam R. Kelly Award winner. There really wasn't an award for the Press Association that Ogden hadn't received. He served 3 decades as president and publisher of the Wheeling-based Ogden newspapers. And he had a lifetime of service in the newspaper industry, and he started his career, and he would talk about this, in Martinsburg in 1956 before moving to Wheeling and becoming involved in the company operation. He was active in newspapers in the national and state level, journalism associations. He served on committees and boards with the American Newspaper Publishers Association, the Southern Newspaper Publishers Association, and of course with our Press Association. He received national and state recognition for his efforts, and just a gracious man, and always there for us when we needed assistance. He was nationally recognized by the Southern Newspaper Association in 2012 with its highest honor, the Mayborn Leadership Award, and in bestowing the award, Donna Barrett, President and CEO of Community Newspaper Holdings, CNHI, for those of us in the industry, referred to Ogden as the very model of a newspaper editor and publisher. And there is so much more we can say about Ogden that is national recognition. But I want to, and we'll do that at a time, but I want to make it a little more personal because it's personal for me. I was fortunate to work for Ogden Nutting, and it's kind of ironic that my first day on the job was the first day I met Ogden Nutting. I was still in college at West Liberty and hired to come work at the News Register at Intel. And I showed up, and we have a lot of people here from those days and from the Wheeling office. And I showed up, and at the time, the parking downtown was terrible, and the parking lot was worse. The bank, I think it was Citibank at the time. No, it wasn't Citibank. I'm not sure the bank. Half Dollar Bank at the time, their drive-through emptied into our parking lot. So they had put a drive-through in. So when you're trying to park, you're also dealing with people leaving the bank drive-through to get out to the street. And there wasn't much parking. And then they had recently put in, the Associated Press had put a dish in about twice the size of these tables, it seemed like, and it took up 2 or 3 parking spaces. So I'm getting there, and where do I park? And I've got a meeting, I got to get in there. And the gentleman was parking, and he got out of his vehicle, and he had a sports coat and a tie and a blue shirt, but he wasn't he was just dressed for work. And he was parking, and I believe, if I get this right, it was an Audi station wagon. It wasn't brand new, it was an older one. It was a nice vehicle. He was parking it, and he said, "Can I help you, young man?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm trying to find a place to park." And he directed me to where to park. And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." And he asked my name, and I told him, and I think I asked his name, I'm not sure. And he said, "Ogden Nutting." And I thought, I know that name. Really? So he helped me get in the door and told me where to go, and he went his way, and I went to my office, or not to my office, I went to meet somebody to finish all the paperwork. And I said, "I was in the parking lot with the gentleman, Ogden Nutting." He said, "Oh, yeah, that's Ogden, he owns the paper." I thought, "Oh, okay, great." The lesson I learned from that, and Ogden helped me, I work with great journalists, and a lot of them are in this room, but Ogden helped me develop some core values, and that was one of them. Speak to everybody, be kind, and be helpful. And I thought, I'm going to remember that. So that was the kind side of Ogden. And then later, and this was kind too, but one of my first byline stories. And when you're a journalist starting out, it's like, "Oh, I got a byline." And it was a big thing to me back then. It wasn't front page. It was inside city council or federal courts. I had one of the new beats where they put the new people, but it was my byline. And it was inside paper. And I'm reading it. I'm like, "Oh, this is my stuff. This is my name. I'm going to show my mom." My phone rings, and it was Ogden Nutting. And this is my first byline, and the owner of the company calls me. And I thought, this probably isn't good. Or I'm hoping it's good, but I'm afraid it's not. And he said, "Don, I'm reading your city council story." And I thought, wow, he's reading the paper's just out, and there's all kind of news, but he's reading my city council story. And he said, go to, I think it was maybe page 8 was the inside cover. He said, go to page 12, the jump. And I'm like, oh my God, he's got clear to the jump. He's read the whole thing. And he pointed out something to me, and I can't remember what it was at this point, but it wasn't wrong. It just didn't explain it enough that he thought I needed more background and I should be prepared next time it came up, that I didn't really recognize the importance of it, that I needed more background and to do a better job with it. And he didn't say this, but I got to thinking that I'm a reporter. I'm there to tell a story. I'm not there to take minutes. I need to make sure that I understand what's going on and that I give it insight to the reader and I tell the story. And I took from that one, it was important to Ogden because it was, the front page news was world news and that was important, but it was important because it was community news. He wanted that community news recognized and he wanted it explained. And he was willing to read all the way to the jump on a city council story that a new reporter had written and take time out of his day to give me a call and give me some insight. And I'm sure other people in the room who worked there got the same type of calls. I wasn't the only one. But I took that and said, this is what's important in community journalism. This is how you build newspapers. And I was luckily able to move on. I worked in Wheeling, I worked in New Martinsville, I worked in Sistersville, I worked in Elkins, I worked in Martinsburg, all for the Ogden newspaper group, 25 years. And we were able to be successful with those locations. And particularly in Elkins, when we had the Intermountain, I was there for 10 years, we had a great staff and they did a great job. And several years, we earned the General Excellence Award for reporting and for advertising. And things were really going pretty well. And I was like, oh, I'm doing pretty well. This is good. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I get a call, and Ogden says, Dawn, I'm coming down to take you to lunch this week or next week. And I had been invited, actually, we'd been doing so well, I'd been invited up, and we had met and talked. And you didn't meet Ogden a lot, but he could do a lot in a short period of time. So I was like, okay, great. So Ogden comes down, takes me to lunch, meets everybody, goes through the paper, from the inserters to everybody, says hello, introduces himself, takes me to lunch. And I'll be honest, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get an attaboy, a pat on the back, we're doing good, this is great. And I did, and I think I know I did. But, so we're at lunch, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting this praise, this is good, and I got it. And then Ogden looked at me and said, Dawn, how much better would your paper be if I hired the staff of the New York Times to come here and work for you? And I'm sitting there at the table, and I'm thinking, oh, great. I want to pat on the back, I get a trick question. You know, he could have probably asked anything I might have been able to answer, but I was just dumbfounded. And I said, well, sir, we would be much better. And he said, no, Dawn, you wouldn't. I said, okay. He said, you would be out of business. He said, a community newspaper cannot afford to be better than the community can afford. He said, we cannot spend resources this community can't supply. We're a business. Every newspaper is a business. You have to represent your community on the pages, but also in your expenditures and your staff. You have to work within your operation and your market. He said, you can try to be outstanding, you can try to be excellent, you can improve, but you can't spend money that this market can't generate. And we talked more, but that was probably for the rest of my career, one of my real core principles is when I was in a paper and I was working in the community, I had to make sure that paper, one, represented the community, but also didn't get to be financially upside down. You had to, it was more, and I think this is the way I would put it, no community is better off without their newspaper. And if you run it and it's not financially stable, then you've hurt the community. Now, it's difficult in these changing times for all of you, to keep your papers in the black, profitable, and supported by your community. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see the subscription base become more and more important, people paying more to get your product because our advertising base has changed. But I never lost sight of what Ogden told me. right-size your paper to your community. You have to do that. Everyone would like to have the staff of the New York Times or the Washington Post, but Elkins couldn't afford that. We were a good paper for that community, and Ogden wanted to come down and make sure that I remembered that, and I never forgot that. So I was always kind to people. I was always involved in the community, trying to make sure I knew what was going on and knew the stuff that was happening, and I always tried to make sure that the paper I was managing was right size for the community, and that was very important to me. I think with that, we are going to move on, but I know that all of you remember Ogden and enjoyed his company. He was such a gracious member of the committee, and I think he would be very proud of what we did today and what we're last night. So again, thank you for being here for this event. And now I'm going to move on to the Veterans Committee and start the inductions. This is an example of a great newspaper man, but someone who would not have gotten this recognition probably without the Veterans Committee. William Harper was born in 1808 and died in 1887. He was born in Chambersburg, PA, and as a youth lived in Stanton, Virginia, and was associated with his brother, General Kenton Harper, prominent through his work with the Staunton Spectator. He began his work in Romney, establishing the first newspaper in that section of the state, the Hardy and Hampshire Intelligencer, later the South Branch Intelligencer, in 1828. He remained with the paper until his death almost 60 years later. Described as delicate in health and retiring in disposition, Harper was a correspondent in the newspaper. He aimed at making his paper a wholesome influence and a welcome visitor in the homes of his readers. An advocate of the Wing principles until the Civil War, he supported the Democratic Party during and after the Great Conflict. The paper totally kept abreast of professional improvements. It continued under his widow's editorship until 1890, when it was sold to a stock company and merged later into John Cornwell's Hampshire Review. The Hampshire Review is still in operation. And with that, we induct William Harper into the West Virginia Press Association Hall of Fame. Could I have a round of applause? Our next inductee is, and we want to make sure we're clear on this, Samuel Craig Shaw. His son was Samuel Shaw, and also a publisher of this newspaper in Moundsville. But we are inducting, would be Sam's, if any of you knew Sam, who was quite a character, this was Sam's father. Samuel Craig Shaw was born in 1874 and died in 1957. He was the publisher of the Moundsville Echo from 1917 until his death. He had been associated with the Echo since its founding by his father in 1895. Shaw was born in Clarion County, PA, the son of the late Mr. and Mrs. James Davis Shaw, who came to West Virginia and settled temporarily in New Martinsville and Middleburn before becoming permanently established in Moundsville, where the elder Shaw founded the Echo. Samuel Craig Shaw became publisher of the paper upon the death of his father and continued active participation in its operation until his death. He was active in civic and community affairs in Moundsville and in public life. He was also active in the Democratic Party politics. With that, we induct Samuel Craig Shaw into the West Virginia Press Association Hall of Fame. I have one more bio, then we have some other speakers, and we have some comments on those. So next, I will start the induction for Dawn Marsh. Many of you knew Dawn or read Dawn, and we are honored to have Dawn's son here, Dr. Clay Marsh. I will do the bio, and then Clay has a few remarks, and then we will move forward. Dawn Marsh served as a writer and editor of the Charleston Gazette for 40 years. As Gazette editor, Marsh was known for a biting off and scathing weekly column that won him a Distinguished Writing Award from the American Society of Newspaper Editors in 1987. Early in his reporting career, he was selected for a Nieman Fellowship, an honor that allowed him to study at Harvard University during the year of 1955. Marsh joined the Gazette in 1952, at which time he covered the police, city, courthouse, and state house beats. Among his many assignments were the Whidden coalfield strike, the Holden mine disaster, and John F. Kennedy's 1960 primary campaign in West Virginia. Marsh was forced to retire in 1992 after a near-fatal heart attack, and at that time became a regular commentator on Talk Line, a talk show on the statewide Metro News radio network. This is a quote from his nomination. Don Marsh was the most intelligent person I ever knew. He had vast knowledge and read all 11 volumes of William Durant's Story of the Civilization, said James Haught, who succeeded Marsh as the Gazette's editor, and he cared passionately about social justice, about improving life for the underdog. That was the endless theme of his newspaper work, and later his radio commentary. Born into a coal mining family, Marsh grew up in Omar in Logan County. The name on his birth certificate was Sidney Roy Marsh, but his family always used the name of his step-grandfather, so he was known as Don Siegel during the first half of his life. He graduated from Logan High School, served in the Navy at the end of World War II, and received a journalism degree from West Virginia University in 1950. He worked briefly for the newspaper in Parkersburg and Bluefield before coming to the Charleston Daily Mail in 1951. The following year, he joined the Gazette. In 1971, Marsh was appointed Gazette city editor. In 1976, publisher W.E. Chilton chose him to be the editor, succeeding Harry Hoffman. In 1992 interview, Marsh said of his coal camp background, it had shaped his political thinking. My attitudes are a reflection of how I grew up. It's the powerful exploiting the powerless that bothers me as much as anything. With that, we induct Don Marsh into the West Virginia Press Association Hall of Fame. And now, if you'll join me in welcoming Dr. Marsh to the podium.
So Don, I should limit my comments to 40 minutes, is that what you said? So it's really quite an honor to represent our family for this recognition of my dad. And I would say that my dad probably influenced me more than any single person on the earth about how you think about things and how you approach things in my profession. My dad loved being a newspaper person. I said, well, maybe I'll do that. He goes, no. Said, you be a professional person, but newspapering is the best business in the world. And he grew up in a coal mining camp. His father, my grandfather, was a coal miner. His uncle, his hero in the world, Woody, was a coal miner who came back as a foreman of the mine and got killed by a boulder falling on him in a coal mine. My dad only went to college because of the GI Bill. He went to West Virginia University and ended up on the police beat. And as he was doing his job, he continued to move up in the organization, and he covered the Buffalo Creek flood disaster. And unbeknownst to him, people on the editorial board took those stories and sent it to a contest. And my dad got a letter in the mail and says, congratulations, you are selected as a Nieman Fellow and you get to spend a year at Harvard University. And my dad was a military veteran by that time, but he was freaked out. He was freaked out. And he and my mom weren't married yet, and there was letters that they were writing back and forth. And he said, you know, I'm not cut out for this. These people are so smart, and you know, and he really didn't have that good vision of himself until about halfway through. And there's a letter that my mom still has, and the letter says, well, there's good news and bad news. Either I'm much smarter than I thought I was, or everybody else is much less smart than I thought they were. So from that point on, it really changed his life. And having that year experience really helped set his vision. And my dad stood for the little man. He grew up in a household where his mom and dad were uneducated. He loved to read. My grandmother loved to read. And he loved knowledge. He loved words. And for him, constantly reading and embracing different ideas, different cultures. He did. He read Will and Ariel Durant's History of the World, 14 volumes. He read the Bible, he read the Quran, and he read them not because of political ideation or religious ideation. He read them because he was so thirsty for knowledge. And during his time at the Gazette with Ned Chilton, they coined the term, I believe, sustained outrage for social injustice, and that's where he was. My dad was he was a lovely man, but he was a pretty rigid guy. He had right and wrong that was very, very clear to him, but he loved our family. And for me, one of the things that my dad really blessed me with was he loved words and he loved thinking. So we used to play games at the dinner table about what verb, what tense, name all the US states, etc. And he also had moments in his life that were very unexpected to him. So he accompanied John F. Kennedy when Kennedy was running for president, and they were in Logan County, and my grandmother told Kennedy, "You're going to be elected president." And in our basement to this day, there's a picture of my dad shaking hands with John F. Kennedy, and the inscription says, "To Don, whose mom always knew first, John F. Kennedy." He also was the host for a Vista volunteer named Jay Rockefeller. So they ended up being friends, and now I've gotten to know the senator well, and that's been quite a privilege. My dad lived a very committed life to stand up for the people that were less fortunate. And then in his mid-60s, he suffered a heart attack, and he ended up in the hospital and had a stress test and had sudden death, had an hour and a half of CPR. And the surgeon that took him to the operating room said, "Why would I take this man to the operating room? He's dead." But he ended up making it through that. He was in the hospital for a long time. And after he was discharged, he and I played the war games we used to play. And I beat him. And for him, that was the most tragic thing. And he looks at me and he says, "I can't believe you're taking advantage of an old, sick man." And then about 2 months later, we played the same war game and he killed me and he goes, "Back to normal." The last story I want to tell is that when my dad ended up having his heart attack and long medical problem, he quit the newspaper. And he tried one episode of a TV show, and he and I both watched it, and he decided that was going to be the end of his TV career, appropriately, may I add. But he ended up on the radio with Hoppy Kercheval, who he loved dearly. And I was coming back and for a weekend, and my dad said, "Do you want to come to the station to listen to us do the radio show?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so I'm sitting in the back room, and you know, they're going on, and my dad obviously would challenge everybody and would go through, and he was throwing this statistic and that statistic out. And so he finished, and we were walking out, we were going to lunch, and he said, "What did you think?" And I said, "Oh my God, it was unbelievable. How in the world did you remember all that information?" Because I remembered a lot of it. I made some of it up. Said if you just say it authoritatively, people usually accept it. So anyway, it's really a wonderful privilege for my family. I want to thank you for my mom, my brother, and our family for this great honor. I also want to say that Bill Nutting's here, and Bill is a important reason why I am back in West Virginia, and I very much appreciate you and your family and your dad. Really wonderful man. And also former Congressman David McKinley is here somewhere, I think, and talking to him, as well as President Jim Nimitz from our osteopathic school, and our team over there at the table from West Virginia University. It's really been such a privilege to be back in West Virginia. And I have to say, for our family, this is a really meaningful recognition of somebody who we love dearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Clay. I would now like to welcome Jim McGoldrick to recognize Joseph Mills.
It's my privilege today to help recognize a dear friend in the newspaper business who had a short career in West Virginia, but a career that did make a difference and continues to make a difference for all of us today. Joe's story started in 1983 when he purchased the Work County Journal, small newspaper in the smallest county in West Virginia. I had been on the board a few years of the association and took it upon myself to drive to Elizabeth to welcome him to the newspaper business in West Virginia and to encourage him to become involved in our association. And wasn't there very long to find out that my predecessor in St. Mary's had sold his predecessor in Elizabeth Freedom Just writers that were used for typesetting, for those who have never heard of those. And an early conversation in 1983, now this is obviously pre-desktop publishing, almost pre-computers for most of us, the man said there has to be something better than this. And I agreed with him and told him that we had moved on to a generation of typesetting equipment called CompuGraphic, which became kind of a household word in the newspaper business. And he said, that's really not for me, not my cup of tea. There just has to be something better in the pipeline somewhere. And so he persevered and did his research, and no internet to do the research on, but he did his research and came to the conclusion that Macintosh computers were the future of the world and the newspaper business in particular. And he often told me that before it was all over, that this would be what it's reduced to. We carted around and carried around, before laptops became popular, the old Macintosh Plus computers, and we thought we really had something, and so did Joe. And by today's standards, of course, those are toys. But he said, we really need to get together, and we probably ought to buy comparable equipment so that if mine breaks down, I can use yours, and if yours breaks down, you can use mine. And that sounded like a great concept to me, and so we did. And then the flood of 1985 that ravaged our state forced many newspapers whose offices had been devastated to begin to look for other technologies, other ways to continue producing their newspapers, and Apple computers came to the fore. And very quickly, Joe earned a reputation as, once he knew something, he knew it and was willing to share it, and there was no need to tell him a second time how something worked. And so he gained kind of a reputation as a focal point for people early on trying to master the art of using Apple Macintosh computers, and he was very successful at it. Joe's career spanned only 7 years, but in those 7 years, he was a true pioneer of technology in our newspapers, led the way for where we are today in producing our newspapers, far beyond the Apple Macintosh computers that we thought were so stupendous in the early 1980s. Joe Mills served as the owner, editor, and publisher of the Work County Journal for nearly 7 years. He was born in Parkersburg in 1939 and spent his early and teen years in Elizabeth, but moved to Ohio to attend Burnham High School in Sylvania and later the University of Toledo. So Joe returned to the place of his youth when he bought his hometown newspaper. A highly spiritual man, he pursued a theology degree from the Boston University School of Theology. He worked as an ordained United Methodist minister and pastored churches in Ohio and Massachusetts before returning to West Virginia. He served as director of the Wood County Community Action Association in Parkersburg for some months before then Governor Arch Moore appointed Joe to head the West Virginia Office of Economic Opportunity from 1970 to 1977. At the time of his purchase of the Journal in 1983, Mills was an insurance agent in Charleston. In 1986, he became one of West Virginia's pioneers in computer technology when he installed his Apple computer system. A stickler for accuracy, Mills displayed fairness, enthusiasm, intensity, and humor in frequent editorial opinions, and especially in his personal column titled Dear Helen, in which he reflected his love for his mother and other close family members. Joe walked with the aid of crutches and leg braces due to a battle with cancer in the 1970s. He was involved in a serious car accident one early spring morning in 1987 that caused him to be permanently confined to an electric wheelchair. As a man of great independence, Joe was resilient and continued to drive by the use of a specially equipped van. That accident unfortunately set off a series then of medical difficulties for Joe that ultimately claimed his life in 1990. In his short 7-year career, Joe was an active member of the West Virginia Press Association and served as a judge for many of the contests that are submitted to us from other states. Bill Childers, then director of the Press Association and a good friend of Joe's, said Joe had amazing depth and resources and tremendous personal courage, and indeed he did. Said Childers, publishing a weekly newspaper is a tremendous and grueling mental drain, and more so for a person laboring under the conditions that he was. And that was a comment that Bill Childers made at Joe's funeral in 1990. And so today, I'm privileged to see that Joe Mills is inducted as a member of the West Virginia Press Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'd now like to welcome David Hedges to induct Mary Helen Hedges.
It's my honor to tell you about my former boss in more ways than one. She was my editor and also my mother. My father was practicing law in Spencer with his father when World War II came calling. He was drafted into the Army and put into military intelligence and given some training and sent to Cincinnati, Ohio to look for some Nazi spies. I don't know if he ever found any spies, but he found a young Irish Catholic woman named Mary Helen O'Connor. She lost her mother at a young age, and so she lived with her father and her 3 brothers. And it's understandable they were very protective of the only female in the family when she brought this guy home for dinner. And my mother told me once that my father had 3 strikes against him right off the bat. He was a Methodist, he was a Democrat, and he was from West Virginia. But they had a lot in common. They were both kind and gentle people who had a real desire to improve the world around them. So they eventually married, and when my father's military obligation was complete, he brought her back to Spencer, where they continued to grow their family, which numerically at least was very successful. I'm the 8th of her 9 children. My father bought the Roanoke Reporter in 1948 from a friend of his who didn't want to replace his aging press. He didn't want to do that either, so he contracted with the owners of the other paper in town, the Times-Record, to print his paper. And about 15 years later, they joined together and formed the Spencer newspapers. Spencer was making a lot of progress in those days, with one exception. Our schools were in really atrocious physical condition. The combined elementary middle school was so overcrowded. There was 45 kids in a classroom, typically. The high school was a 3-story building with the top 2 floors condemned by the state fire marshal. And classes were in these dilapidated so-called temporary outbuildings that sprinkled around the campus that more resembled a MASH unit than it did a school. The newspaper was doing well financially, but the content had slipped over the years, and it got down to the point where it wasn't much in there except high school sports and the car wreck of the week. Every week there was a car wreck on the front page. My brother-in-law, who lived in Morgantown, told me once, he didn't know our photographer, but he said, when I come to Spencer, I'm going to stay away from that Sidney Boggs guy because everywhere he goes, there's a car wreck. Several school bonds were put before the voters, and they always got a majority vote, but they never got the 60% that was required at that time for a school bond. My parents bought out the other owners in 1977, and my mother went to work. By then, her last child was in junior high school, and she went to work as the editor. And she never took advantage of her position as owner. She covered the late night meetings, and she drove up the hollers to do feature stories. And she wrote a weekly column about life in a small town called Over the Back Fence. Not long after the change in ownership, there's another school bond on the ballot. And this time the newspaper got behind it and supported it. They wrote stories about the dilapidated schools and editorials in support of the bond, and solicited advertisements from people who supported the issue. And it passed. It was the first bond that Roanoke had passed since the 40s. And the schools were remodeled or in some cases replaced. I was a college student in the late 70s and worked summers at the paper. And then after I graduated from WVU in 1981, I went to work there full time. And people say it's difficult to work with family members, but I didn't find that to be the case. She was always lifted up everybody around her, and was a pleasure to work with. Young people might find this hard to understand, but in those days we inputted our stories on devices that didn't have spell check. There were these books called dictionaries. You had to look words up, and but as long as my mother was around, you didn't need a dictionary. You'd ask her how to spell something, and she told you, and she was never wrong. And same with grammar. You give her a question, she'd tell you exactly how it was supposed to be. And once again, she was right. I worked with her for several years before she retired. When I recently went through several health issues that landed me in the hospital for a long time, and one day in the hospital I got a text message from my daughter-in-law, Annie, who also works at the paper. She's one of the ones that couldn't be here this weekend because she's at home covering our festival. It was a copy of the article Don Betsy had posted to the Press Station website saying who had been elected to the Hall of Fame. What was news to me? I immediately shared it with my siblings, and they said, well, did you nominate her? And I said, no, I wasn't on the nominating committee. I said, in fact, I didn't even vote for her. Because I was so sick at the time, I wasn't paying attention to my emails, and I didn't see the ballot that they mailed out. I didn't even know she was being considered. But My mother never intended to be a journalist, but she was a good writer, and she enjoyed people and their stories. And she loved her community. So for those of you who did vote for her, I just want you to know that you made a good decision. So I'm happy to announce her as the newest member of the Hall of Fame. And
Thank you, David. I didn't have the opportunity to know most of our inductees, but I was fortunate enough to know Mike Myer. I remember when I first met Mike, we were in Morgantown. It was my first board meeting. I was nervous and flustered, trying to unpack my bag at the end of the table. Mike and other members walked in, and he walked right up to me. Nervously, I looked up to say hello, and Mike smiled and simply said, "So I hear that you have chickens." Completely caught off guard. My nervousness left. I was fine. We had an entire conversation about my backyard chickens. After that, the meeting went off without a hitch. It was all thanks to him. I don't know him as most of you, but I do know that he was one of the kindest souls I ever met. He had a way of putting people at ease, even incredibly nervous people like myself, and I was honored to have known him. And now for our final inductee, Mike Myer, I'd like to invite John McCabe to speak.
Well, Dawn told me we had till 1, so I've got a good hour here to keep you all going. I do have some good remarks and some good stories. But first, Betsy, thank you for those words. You really kind of upstaged my entire speech with that heartfelt thought of Mike. And wow, just what a great day, though. You know, Clay, thank you so much for the words on your dad. David, same with your mother. Just great day for us to get together and celebrate newspapering. You know, I do want to take 1 minute, and I'd be remiss if I didn't. You know, I know our friend Dawn Smith, who's taking a picture of me right now. So Dawn, you know how much I love that. You know, Dawn has done a really good job in the last 30 hours of downplaying his departure and really playing up Betsy's arrival, which is 100% the right thing to do. But I think we all need to take just a minute and remember what Dawn has done over the last 10 years for this press association. It has been a remarkable ride with Dawn at the helm during very tumultuous times. He has managed a board that has some, you know, Dawn mentioned last night of his stubborn personality. He has managed a board with some of the most stubborn personalities of people I have ever come across in my life. He's managed that well and gracefully. And again, he has moved this press association forward during its most difficult times, both financially and from, you know, the pressures we're all feeling in the industry right now, and from our lawmakers and how we can do our jobs. So Dawn, you know, if you all could join me in giving Dawn a well-deserved round of applause. Dawn, I surely hope you didn't think we were going to get out of the weekend without that. I know you wanted to. Also, do want to take just a moment to recognize and again welcome Betsy Miles. Betsy's been with us for a long time at the association. But, you know, Betsy, you've accepted the challenge. You know, we need you to succeed, just as Dawn did. We need you to carry that torch for the Press Association in the coming years during what, again, will continue to be difficult times in our industry. You know, the pressures we have. You know, we need you to be our advocate in Charleston, just as Dawn was. And I hope I speak for all of the publishers and editors in the room. And just as I told you last night, when you need help, when you need to put out the call, please immediately react. Get us to help you do the important work that the Press Association does every single day. So if all of you again could join me in a quick round of applause for Betsy as she does take on this exceptional role. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is because it's the right thing to do, but it's also what Mike would have done. Mike would have been the first to heap praise on Dawn and to welcome Betsy just as he did Betsy and her chickens with open arms. That's just who Mike was. Mike was such a unique, important individual in my life, in the life of people at this table over here, most especially the table back here, his family. And I surely hope I do some level of justice to him here today. Mike was a newspaper man. It's a simple fact. That's how he lived his life. It's what he loved. His life revolved around a few basic principles. His love for his family, and again, as I mentioned, this table back here, his wonderful wife Connie, Christina and Jessica, his daughters, Gemma and Rocco, his grandchildren. They were his first and true love. And his love for newspapering, his love for what we do every day in informing our communities. And really his love for those who really knew him, his love for West Virginia was so deep. He loved our state. He loved Wetzel County. He was about the only person I've ever met who loved Wetzel County unconditionally. He just, that's where Mike was from, but he loved Wetzel County. I know when his mother was up in years and he was kind of burning the candle on both ends and working all day and then leaving work at 4 o'clock and driving to New Martinsville to help her keep her affairs in order. I know it was tough, but he loved it. And of course, it was his mother, so of course he loved it, but he loved to promote Wetzel County whenever we had the opportunity to do that. He loved the power of newspapers to bring communities together. That was really his mission as a newspaper man. He started each morning, with the thought of how he could best serve others through the pages of our newspapers. What can we do today to make life better for our valley? What can we do today to make life better in West Virginia? How do we tell stories that really matter? That was Mike through and through. In many ways, and I will take this to my grave, he represented as an editor and as a person the best of us. He really exemplified all of the things that I find important in an individual. He represented our industry every day with a principled, by-the-book approach, that all of us would do well to remember today. He was fair in his work, but he's never spiteful. When things got personal against him, he never used the pages of the newspaper to fight back. He would do it with facts, but never personal. He was measured at all times, and I think that's really important with an editor. That's something I've really learned a lot in the last few years, and particularly since Mike's passing, that how to be more measured in my approach, because I tend to be a little bit hot-headed at times. For those of you who know me, you can definitely agree with that. He understood better than anyone the responsibility that we as editors and newspaper people have and how we do our jobs. And he he wielded that responsibility fairly and judiciously every day, and I think that means a lot. Mike died very unexpectedly early in 2021. It was obviously total surprise to all of us, and that's just a bad way to say it, but it really was. And it was right during the height of a third COVID wave, I believe. And so, his family, his newspaper family, his press association family, none of us ever had the chance to really say goodbye to Mike. And I'm sorry that I'm leaning this way, looking at the family. I'm ignoring the Hedges family, so I will do a better job as we move forward. Because Mike considered all of us family here. This was his family. I've worked with Mike every day for 20 plus years. All of you loved and looked forward to meeting with Mike at press association events or talking to him on the phone. He impacted all of us in so many ways. And when you don't get that chance to really say goodbye, it is very difficult. And I've had a hard time with it for 2+ years now, just in how do we really let this deep part of all of our lives depart without a real farewell. And today, this is our chance for all of us to say goodbye. I was talking with Christina Myer, his daughter, who's the editor of the Parkersburg News and Sentinel, and I will say, if you don't know Christina, and I think most of you do, but Christina is, without a doubt, one of the finest editors I've ever met, one of the finest editors in any newspaper in this country. And that's both of her own accord and also because of how she grew up. She has found her own voice, but when I read the editorial she sends out, it is definitely Mike's style with her voice, which is incredible for me to be able to see that every day. But Christina and I were talking on Thursday, and she was sharing a conversation she had had with her mother about today and about Mike's induction. And Connie, essentially put it the same way. It's time for this to happen. Mike deserves very much this honor today. And as a family extending, if we couldn't have done it at another time, and frankly, with COVID, we didn't really have that opportunity when it first happened. Then here today with his press association family, his newspaper family, and some of his closest friends, this was the time to do it. And so I'm so happy to be part of that. I'm so happy that David McKinley, Congressman McKinley, could be part of that. He and Mike were very close confidants. So glad Bishop Darrell Cummings from here in Wheeling could be part of it. Again, just 30-year relationship with each other that just grew every day. And, and I'd like to think that Mike would be embarrassed on one hand that we're all sitting here talking about him, but also pleased and humbled that we all could gather today and on his behalf. So I told you I had an hour. I'm going to take every minute of it, so I'm only teasing. I'm going to read Mike's bio now, again, you have it in front of you, but I think there's some really good points in there that I want to build on. J. Michael Myer was the longtime executive editor of the Intelligence and Wheeling News Register for 23 years in those publications that he loved dearly. Prior to that, he was editor just of the News Register, and that started in 1991. At the time of his death, he was president of the trustees of the West Virginia Press Association, which is the educational nonprofit supported by the state's newspaper industry. Mike was deeply involved in the Press Association, as many of you know. He was a past president of the Press Association, and I told Perry Nardo I would give a little dig into him today, which I'm going to do right now. Perry couldn't be with us. Mike was a recipient of the Adam R. Kelly Premier Journalist Award. Not the Adam R. Kelly Award, the Premier Journalist Award, because as Perry likes to joke, when he got it, they took the premier off of it, and it just made it the Adam R. Kelly Award, which that says a lot. And Perry, did want me to convey to Connie and Christine and Jessica his deep love for Mike, and sorry he couldn't be here this weekend. Mike's 46-year newspaper career, included stints as a reporter, weekly newspaper publisher down in Wetzel and Tyler counties, and then editor of 2 daily publications. He was well known throughout West Virginia and Ohio for his daily editorials and his weekly column, that focused on local and state issues. One of the best columns I think I've ever read was one Mike penned a few years ago and won a first place award for at our Better Newspaper contest, and it dealt with obituaries and all of the great stories that are in obituaries every day that never get told. When we run obituaries in our newspapers, for many people, that's the only time you find out that the guy down the street served in the Second World War and did something totally unique, or was an inventor, or a mother who raised 9 children while earning a doctorate degree and becoming a teacher. And Mike's column was so much of a wake-up call, I think, for me, of really looking at our obituaries and how do we do a better job as an industry in telling those stories before it's the last thing we know about these folks. That's one of our true missions, is how do we get those really interesting, compelling stories out there. So didn't mean to divert much, but that's a column that's always stood out to me. His colleagues and others in the communities knew Mike as a family man who loved the Ohio Valley, as I said, particularly his native Wetzel County. He had a passion for the outdoors, often spending vacations camping with Connie. I don't know how much Connie always loved that, but Mike did. Connie went along for the ride. Again, just a quick diversion. I remember as a few years back when they went over to Shenandoah, and I asked Mike when he got back how it went, and he said, "Well, we had to stay in the lodge this time. Wasn't allowed to. No more tent camping. No more air mattresses. Getting too Other people are getting too uncomfortable for that. I didn't want to say old. He might have said old, but getting too uncomfortable for sleeping on an air mattress. So they started staying in the lodge, and he was not happy. And of course, children and grandchildren were pulled along on those adventures. He championed social causes in our region, from education, passionate about education. Of course, he lived with a family of educators. And even feeding the hungry. He loved to help people. We mentioned Ogden earlier. Ogden had the day Mike died, and we were talking on the phone of what we wanted to say. This was a very hard hit for Ogden when Mike passed. They were very close, as his comments here reflect. For me, Mike was a close friend, a valued and respected source of good advice and counsel based on sound judgment, values, and common sense, and also someone with a good sense of humor. Might be stretching it a little bit. An odd sense of humor probably would have been the right thing to say, but you can't say that in a newspaper. So Mike's love for his family and pride in what his wife Connie and his daughters Christina and Jessica accomplished was sincere, great, and obvious. And this last part is one that Bill Nutting and I just had the privilege of using also for his dad's farewell story. The shortest editorial ever written certainly applied to him. A family loved, a community and state served, a life well lived. I think that sums up Mike really well. I really do. And frankly, why we use things, it sums up Ogden perfectly. It really does. And so before I sit here and look like a fool, I'll move on. Ogden also said, in his 46th career, Mike had various titles: reporter, city editor, publisher, editor, and executive editor. Today, he would, be called by the outside world a journalist, but that designation he preferred most was simply newspaper man. Yes, a good newspaper man, a very good newspaper man, and that is 100% correct. Mike was just he loved newspapers. Dawn's comment, Mike has been one of the strongest editorial voices in West Virginia for decades. He won every award as a writer, editor, and columnist. He's a respected leader and advisor. And I think these are also some things that really do show who Mike was. As president of the foundation, he was the leader in providing college scholarships and paid internships for journalism students in West Virginia. He took great pride in the efforts of the Press Association and the newspaper industry to support student journalism in West Virginia. And we'll talk about this just here in a minute. Another one of his many highlights of his commitment to the people of the state was leading an effort to gather and deliver Christmas toys for the children of families impacted by the flood that ravaged much of West Virginia in November of 1985. I don't know who remembers that flood, the Great Flood of 1985. It was a real mess, and a lot of people were highly impacted, but we'll get into that again here in a second. That's a nice bio of Mike. It really is. It tells us all we need to know about who Mike Myer was and the impact he had. But I don't want to drag on for another 8 pages, but I do want to highlight a few things that have happened recently that, even outside of this, brought Mike back into just intense focus for me in the work that he did. About a month ago, we had a really contentious issue here in Wheeling where a local elected official, very wrongly called out a business leader on council floor and just was totally untransparent in his approach. So it made for, you know, as Derek Red knows, made for a very easy editorial on our behalf to say, you know, grow up, be transparent in your workings. This should never be personal, particularly, you know, against someone who serves on a public board and gives of their time as a volunteer. And, you know, I was really happy with the editorial that we wrote, but I was even, happy is not the right word, I was humbled the day that editorial ran when I got a phone call that Saturday, late that Saturday morning, from a person that I have great respect for. And their comment to me was, that's an editorial that Mike Myer would have written. Very well done. It was that simple. And, you know, and I don't know quite what to say with that. You know, we all have our own distinct voices and our approaches to things, but I was really, really humbled by that. You know, another instance, about a week after that, I got a call early on a Thursday morning from a guy named, here in the Ohio Valley, named Jim Van Vranken. And so Jim's wife, Gail, ran for many, many years an organization down out of Marshall County called Boatsy's Boxes. They would put together care packages to send overseas. And Jim and I reminisced for a few minutes how his wife, Gail, would always reach out to Mike whenever donations were lagging. And Mike would write an editorial, and we'd do a news story. And, you know, a week later, Boatsy sent in a whole box of care packages to the Middle East for our, you know, our troops serving overseas. You know, that's community newspapering 101. That is, you know, raising the call, getting people involved. You know, Mike did it so well. He did it better than any of us could do. And he was always so good at it. You know, then a couple days ago, just came across something else from Frank Batten, who was the former chairman of Landmark Communications, that I thought was appropriate. And Frank's quote is, you know, our calling was never more important. We have the capacity to inform, to enlighten, to awaken, and to inspire. We as journalists have the opportunity to enrich the lives of thousands of people every day. You know, it's a good synopsis of our industry, I think, and one that Mike would have appreciated. You know, that's how he functioned. You know, he lived to inform the public on the most pressing and important matters of the day. He loved to enlighten readers with his editorials and thought-provoking columns. He loved to awaken in our readers, I feel, a desire to want to know more than just the headlines and scratch the surface of an issue. And, you know, he also loved so much to work with young reporters and help them to understand the industry, to understand how to dig deeper into stories, ask those tough questions, you know, and tell that story to their communities with a vigor and passion as he would have. That's really important, and Mike did that really well. Mike spent his working career in the Northern Panhandle, but he was about so much more than just serving this region. You know, for decades, his work influenced events in Charleston through common sense, fact-based editorials. You know, lawmakers often would come to Wheeling or call Mike if they were thinking about raising the pot tax or raising the cigarette tax, and just ask for counsel on, hey, what's your take? Are you going to bash me over the head because I want to raise taxes? And Mike would always be fair and provide them with, yeah, you know, if you try to raise that, you're going to take the brunt of it. It's that simple, and that's, you know, that's all people can ask for. Governors, you know, when Joe Manchin came to town, Bob Wise, Earl Ray Tomblin, maybe not so much Jay Rockefeller Clay. It wasn't quite the relationship there between Mike and Governor Rockefeller. But when you know, they would, when they were in near Wheeling, not even in Wheeling, they would stop by for a visit to sit down with Mike and talk about the important issues that were going on in Charleston and what readers up here were thinking. Congressman McKinley, who I just mentioned, you know, I remember the first time, I guess Mike was on vacation, and David was driving back from DC to Wheeling and was on I-68. And I didn't really realize at the time that this was a pretty common practice for the two of them to chat on the phone for an hour as David was driving home and talk about the issues important to the Northern Panhandle and to the first district of West Virginia. And it was a good wake-up call for me, not only of the relationship those two men had, but also the, how great is it that, again, a congressman that is from our city can reach out for advice and thought processes on, hey, these events are happening in Washington. What are local folks going to think? What, is this something that is important in our region? Things of that, again, that was such a good relationship between the two. And even outside of West Virginia, Mike had such an impact. I know we're in the West Virginia Press Association, but of course the newspapers up here touch heavily into Ohio. And, Ohio governors, and with COVID it kind of ended, but John Kasich was a twice-a-year visitor to Wheeling to stop in our newsroom and chat with Mike and myself. Every year he was in office. And, think about the governor of Ohio leaving Columbus, driving 2 hours to Wheeling, coming down rickety old Main Street, and stopping at the newspaper office for an hour and a half to talk about issues important to Ohioans. And I remember the first time Governor Kasich stopped in, Mike asked, the basic question I think all of us would ask: why are you here? Why are you in Wheeling? Why, Sherrod Brown, for example, if we meet Sherrod Brown, we go to the Cracker Barrel or Bob Evans over in St. Clairsville in Ohio. And Governor Kasich had said something I'll never forget. He said, respect. He said, I'm here because I respect the work you're doing. And I respect the fact that at that time, the Intel and the News Register were still writing real editorials that made a difference in Ohio when many of the major newspapers in Ohio were pulling back from writing about state government, writing about taxes, and writing about, again, issues that Ohioans needed to be concerned about. That was something that Mike did really well, and it was something that was always very important to us to provide a nice balance between our readership. And, the fact that Governor Kasich and now Governor DeWine, want to know what we're thinking, that's community newspaper 101. I don't have too much longer because I know I've kind of prattled on a little more than I meant to. I did want to share just a couple quick stories that, Mike loved history. For those of us who knew Mike, he loved history, especially when that history could be tied into West Virginia somehow. And the one that always stands out to me is, I think everyone here has probably seen the movie, Mel Gibson, We Were Soldiers Once. When that movie came out, Mike had a copy of the book. That was, I can't remember the author's name. He read it again as that movie was getting ready to come out. He handed it off to me and I read it. And I remember just great conversations and even a great story we did, because if you go through the back of the book of all of the soldiers who died in those few days on this remote mountaintop, you had some Paden City natives, if I remember correctly, some Wetzel County natives who were listed among the dead who died that day. So it turned into, it's not a good story, obviously, but it turned into an important story for our readers on, just reminding them that, hey, this movie's coming out. There's a local angle to that. But he loved history so much. He loved collecting old guns that I don't think he ever shot. Just would buy these old guns. But another story, just real quick, that does tie into the Press Association. About 10 years ago, we had convention down at Snowshoe, and it was a great couple days. And as many of us remember back then, the Saturday afternoon on the convention, was either golf or just kind of hang out and have some fun and take your time and enjoy yourself. Well, Mike had this zany idea before we left Wheeling that we were going to do something really fun. How many people here remember the National Alliance? Anyone remember the National Alliance? William Pierce, neo-Nazi, down in Hillsborough area of Pocahontas County. So, of course, Mr. Pierce died in 2002, so about 10 years before we went. But they had, the National Alliance, again, it was this white supremacist neo-Nazi organization in West Virginia. And they had a huge compound, 400-plus acre compound in Pocahontas County. And Mike said, let's go find it. Let's see if we can find this darn place. So he was driving that trusty old Geo Metro at the time, so we couldn't take that thing. We couldn't take that thing at all with its 12-inch tires. But I had a big SUV, so we hop in my SUV and start, about 1 o'clock on that Saturday, trudging through the backwoods of Pocahontas County to try to find this compound. And we're on these dirt roads where, my car's getting scratched up because the brambles and everything hanging off. He's like, it's just a little further, just a little further. He's sitting there twirling his mustache and everything. And I'm just like, this is a bad idea. So we get down this road, this dirt road that's probably not much wider than this podium to the wall. And it dead ends. And there's just like this little turnaround. So I start kind of, turning around, and Mike looks over and says, oh, there's a building over there. And off this building is hanging the Nazi flag. And, and I said, Mike, this is probably not a very good idea for us to be here. Let's get out of here. So we start turning around, and, about, 3-point turn turns into about a 36-point turn, and this guy comes out of the building. And he walks down, and, Mike rolls the window down and says, oh, we're just lost. We were just out, out here looking for something. And guy had some rather choice words because, it's obvious this wasn't a road anyone should be on it. But yeah, it was, we got out of there just as quick as we could. But, that really does, to me, that's what being a newspaper man is all about. It's that inquisitiveness, that curiousness, that, willingness to do fun things. It was, for me, that's one of the best memories I have with Mike is just, trudging around the middle of nowhere in Pocahontas County looking for a neo-Nazi group. Now, that makes zero sense whatsoever. But, at the time, it sounded like a great idea. Mike, that curiosity, Mike just had that in abundance. And again, I'm going to wrap up here just a second, but Mike had such a big heart too. And right here, Pastor Cummings from here in Wheeling, just one of the finest individuals you ever know. He puts together every year just multiple opportunities for the community to be better, for the community to give to those who are in need. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, back to school. He does these drives for the neediest in our area. And of course, through the newspaper, we always would promote and write editorials and praise him for the great work he was doing. But I didn't know this until sometime later, but Mike also would, at the end of the day, pull out his checkbook and say, how else can I help? What else do you need to make your drive a success this Easter or this Thanksgiving? That says a lot, when he reached into his own pocket and said, how can I help? One second here. Don mentioned in his quote, Christmas in the Mountains. That was quite a remarkable event in our state's history. Most of us, some of us here were older. I was a teenager at the time. I remember it, but don't remember it well. But that was something in 1985. Mike and Adam Kelly, whom he worked for at the time, really made an effort. I'm going to use. I found this last night, and I would be remiss not to use it. But Christina wrote a column about that about 2 years ago now. She may remember it. She may not. But I just want to read a little bit of her column that really does kind of sum up who Mike was, the work he did, the service he gave to others. And this is again from Christina, and she says, I remember vaguely understanding that my dad and his friend, and Christina in 1985, you had been what, 1 year old, there we go. It says, I remember vaguely understanding that my dad and his friend and coworker, and boss at the time, I think, Adam Kelly, had decided to do something to help the families. This is again, this down in, I think it was Parsons area, somewhere in there. Yeah. It had occurred to them, these families, many of whom did not have a lot of money to begin with, would have very little to make a joyous Christmas without help. So they put out the word and called their project Christmas in the Mountains. I'm sure there were others involved in the effort. There must have been. And I apologize for not remembering enough to be able to give them credit now. And again, from Christina, what I got to witness firsthand was how important it was for those two men, who were also busy putting out the newspapers they loved, to get as much money and donations to the people who needed them as possible. I remember Dad talking about a pastor who had called, asking if it was okay to use some of the money to buy some new gadget called a personal computer for a kid who the pastor believed could really benefit from such technology. Again, this is 1985. The pastor had a hunch the young person would have a knack for computers, but wasn't certain such spending would fall in lines with the intention of the project. So I recall my dad saying they had quietly signed off on the request, and that in checking in on the youngster a year or two later, was told the gift had had exactly the effect the pastor had hoped. So again, not only service through the newspapers, but service to others because it's what we're called to do. That meant a lot to Mike, and he lived that every day. And when we do think of serving others, another quick story on Bishop Cummings here. Consider this, Bishop Cummings, again, who just recently was named our Light of the Valley here in the Wheeling area, because that is truly who he is. He's a guy who puts himself out there every day to help others. Mike saw that early on, very early on, like shortly after Bishop Cummings came to Wheeling. And he saw that and did that. It worked in such a way that he would offer the bishop a regular column starting in 1991, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah. A regular column, and the first black columnist in our newspaper is a regular, everyday columnist or every week columnist. It says a lot about Mike, again, that he saw, not only that he brought in the first black columnist to our newspaper as a regular contributor, but also that he saw in Darrell Cummings what we continue to see today, 32 years later, of just an exceptional human being who does nothing but serve others. What foresight. I wish I could do that. I wish I could see 30 years down the line and realize what this person is going to be. And so, Reverend, thank you so much. But Mike was such an amazing, unique person. When you put all this together, it's really just wow. Those of us that worked with him, we would see this every day, and you don't really appreciate it at the time. But when we do step back and think of all Mike did, all he meant, all of the work and efforts he put into helping others have a better life, it really is just remarkable. I know I miss him every day. I do, and that's tough. Just in closing here, Connie, Christina, Jessica, Gemma, Rocco, Mike and I spent countless hours talking about you, and my family as well. But we would talk family every single day. I probably knew more about the five of you than I knew about anyone outside of my own family. And I'm not kidding when I say that. From the days at James Madison University to the days at, when Christina worked for the Dow Jones Newswire and lived in Jersey City, New Jersey, and Mike and Connie would leave, on a Thursday afternoon and go spend the weekend there, and he'd come back and tell me about what they did and where they went. And, it was just, what I can just tell you is, he loved all of you dearly. That, but he really did, and he was always so proud, as Ogden mentioned in his comments, when he talked about you and things you were doing. Connie, when you got your doctorate, and he brought in your dissertation, and we were reading through it, and he was just so thrilled, and it was just such a good man. And I think what really brought it all into focus for me was during COVID, the first wave of COVID. And of course, he's got two grandkids. Priorities had changed a little bit because he was always the first one in the office, always the last one to leave, always in on every Saturday. Rocco and Gemma were Gemma first, and then Rocco came along, and that started to change. As it will, priorities started to change a little bit. And I remember during that first wave of COVID, and every day he and I were the only two in the office, and Bill was there 90% of the time as well. But, it really allowed us to talk deeply about different things. And he came to me one day and he said, I'm thinking about retirement. I said, you're thinking about what? Because I figured they would pull him off his desk one day. And he said, it's nothing quick, and I'm just kind of in my head been thinking about you the next 2, 3, 4 years, but I think I have a plan. I said, okay, that's good. We all need to have plans, but unfortunately, a different decision came down, and Mike wasn't able to enjoy and to put that plan into effect, and for that, Connie, I'm just eternally sorry. You know, Mike's spot in the Hall of Fame is well deserved. You know, his legacy is cemented, and you know, and now his final column has been submitted. Thank you, everyone.